The pressure is on, per reporting in the New York Times. Democrats in the Senate are losing patience with President Joe Biden's total embrace of Israel and its war on Gaza. They want the president to start placing conditions on aid and assistance to the IDF ASAP. 20 or so senators want expressed assurances from the Netanyahu government on Israel's commitment to protecting civilians in Gaza. Here's what Joe Biden had to say about such conditions last week.
Well, I think that's a worthwhile thought, but I don't think if I started off with that, we'd ever gotten to where we are today. We have to take this a piece at a time.
Now, Senator Minority Leader and top Republican Mitch McConnell was less open to the notion of conditions on aid. He told reporters it was a ridiculous idea to condition our assistance to Israel on their meeting our standards. It seems to me it's totally unnecessary.
Yesterday, the House passed a resolution affirming Israel's right to exist. Per the resolution, this Congress also recognizes that denying Israel's right to exist is a form of anti-Semitism. Now, it was that notion in particular that led Republican Representative Thomas Massie to vote no on this resolution, writing on Twitter, "I agree with the title reaffirming the state of Israel's right to exist and much of the language, but I'm voting no on the resolution because it equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is deplorable, but expanding it to include criticism of Israel is not helpful." Massie and Representative Rashida Tlaib were the only members of Congress in the chamber not to support the bill. I believe Tlaib voted present. So Massie, someone I have a lot of admiration for as a libertarian-leaning Republican. He also he has voted against many resolutions of this nature in terms of the Israel conflict, and is, I think, more skeptical of funding them no matter what, which now Democrats are talking about. I think they're reading the tea leaves. I think they're seeing how unpopular President Joe Biden is becoming with members of their coalition because the perception that he's not doing enough to restrain Israel's actions. I think it's frustrating that McConnell, who is so old and out of touch with where the Republican base is on so many issues, just said it doesn't even make any sense. What he said is just wrong. It is not, in fact, crazy to expect that we would get something in return for giving another country a bunch of money, that it would be predicated on some kind of agreement for how it would be spent, that we have to fund everyone and attach no conditions to it. What is conservative about that point of view? In fact, it's not conservative, and actual, genuine conservatives out in the wild, conservative voters, do not agree with that. They don't think we should unconditionally send their tax dollars overseas, no strings attached.
It's already U.S. law to place conditions on our aid to our military aid to foreign countries. They're not supposed to use it in violation of international law. When we talk about a special relationship with Israel, increasingly what's becoming public knowledge, but what has always been clear, is that it is not being held to the same standards. It's not that it's being treated differently and worse than other countries in the world because it is a Jewish state, which is often the criticism that Israel pushes back with when they are criticized as a country, but that, frankly, they've been given more favorable terms than any other country in the world. Despite being one of the richest countries in the world, it is one of the largest beneficiaries of U.S. aid. And now the concern is, even in the midst of what every humanitarian organization has said is an unprecedented crisis, the idea that there would be any limitations on the literal U.S. bombs or bombs bought with U.S. funding should not be used to have a civilian to target ratio of something like 20-1 is being pushed back on by people who are supposed to be, to your point, conservative vanguards in our Congress. And I do want to say, point to Thomas Massie for sure. Rashida Tlaib obviously has been very principled throughout all of this as the only Palestinian member of Congress. But for Massie to just actually vote no on this bill, knowing the kind of backlash that Congress members get from AIPAC for this kind of behavior. AIPAC has already committed to a $100 million spend against the members of the squad for exactly this kind of behavior. To be willing to stick your neck out and take this kind of a stand, I think, is very principled. Yeah,
Rand Paul has in the past filibustered Iron Dome funding, a lot of the same reasons. People like conservative commentators who are very popular and very successful, like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and others, have given voice to this strain of the conservative movement that argues for a less interventionist foreign policy and wants to spend American dollars in America and wants to rethink what our commitments abroad are. Are we making ourselves safer by just giving tons of money to foreign regimes that we exercise no control over whatsoever. I think it's true of Israel. I think it's true of Ukraine. I think it's true of a lot of our spending in the past. But as I said earlier, there's nothing conservative about that we should just fund. I mean, this is a government program. This is another government's program. It's their defense that we're just unthinkingly pouring more money into. Conservatives and many of these conservative leaders, like Mitch McConnell, would, I think, ostensibly recognize in other circumstances that we want more. We want to exercise more control over the FBI now, the IRS, the government agencies that are violating Americans' free speech and civil liberties issues. What the people want is. They don't want more oversight on the people from these agencies. They want more oversight over the agencies. And these are foreign governments, the ones we have the least oversight over.
Absolutely. Now, it's the Leahy law, Leahy, that bans U.S. government from giving aid to foreign military units that are committing human rights abuses. And so far, 25 members of Congress have supported simply applying existing law to the circumstances in Israel. In the Senate, it's just Bernie Sanders, Chris Murphy, Chris Van Hollen, Elizabeth Warren, and John Ossoff. Only five members in the Senate. It's obviously 20 people in the House. I won't list them all. But the idea that it's a controversial principle to simply apply existing law to Israel is really incredible. And it's worth noting that although some people were hopeful when Joe Biden made that statement about putting conditions on aid being a worthwhile thought, his people walked it back right after that. So to the extent that people thought there might be an opening there, that he might be willing to explicitly support that principle, his spokespeople immediately went on the news and said, oh, he just thought it was an interesting thought, but it's not going to manifest in any kind of policy change. Yeah.
It is frustrating when other governments treat us like we're schmucks, like they can get whatever they want out of us without they don't have to do any wiggle room. I mean, this was somewhat true of the Saudi situation where they chop up a journalist, and we're supposed to overlook that because they're going to give us oil and they're going to, solve our economic woes in our time of need. And then they don't even do that. Well, why are we playing footsie with them then?
Well, the irony was that Joe Biden said he was going to make Saudi Arabia a pariah up until he was facing domestic problems in the wake of COVID and having, not being able to access enough oil and the gas prices being high that hurt him politically at home. So he went and started groveling, frankly, to Saudi Arabia. The irony is that now he's similarly facing enormous backlash domestically, but has not decided to change his attitude to Israel to save his own hide. It's interesting to see the parallels there and how he's behaving differently in that circumstance. And it just raises some interesting questions about why it is that, given the diminishing geopolitical significance of Israel in terms of United States foreign policy interests, why it is that he's willing to sacrifice so much, the party's willing to sacrifice so much on principle.
Well, we will continue to follow that, and we'll have more Rising right after this.